Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at BTB World. In today's show, we will be talking about a very important and historic press conference that was held earlier today by DGISPR and DGIS, as well as first appearance to media directly. And this, of course, is in line with the kind of grave matters that were cited by both today, and of course, in the context of journalist Arshad Sharif's death, and then, of course, the kind of narrative that has been put forward by the PTI chairman and the former Prime Minister since his ouster earlier this year. There were numerous issues that have been highlighted by both, in which, of course, the cipher and Arshad Sharif's murder came into the limelight. There were a lot of concerns with regards to the kind of statements that have been made and how the particular cipher was in fact discussed with the former Premier, and it was claimed by DGISPR that it wasn't a big thing, and it was surprising to see it being used as part of the alleged conspiracy that formed the PTI's narrative later on. There were also concerns with regards to Arshad Sharif and what sort of threat existed for him and who all were involved in him leaving the country. DGISI talked about how there was no actual threat coming in for Arshad Sharif within Pakistan, and that threat letter that was issued by the KP government shows that it was perhaps why it was moved to make this move happen and to make Arshad Sharif leave the country. There was, of course, also concern about Airvine News and its CEO and how he should be brought back and be part of the investigations. DGISPR also claimed that the government is responsible to find out and investigate what is going on, and we're going to be waiting for the results of the inquiry commission as to what has happened. But he talked about how the people that have been in touch with him in Dubai and later on need to be also part of this and answer the questions as to why he went to Dubai, who was in touch, who made him leave Dubai, and how they also arranged for him in Kenya. He also talked about how there was no actual threat from the government side for Arshad Sharif to leave Dubai, and there was no reason for him to do so. So a lot of questions, of course, in terms of what has been talked about and point towards PTI's involvement. There was also a lot of concerns, especially with regards to the way that the army and the institutions have been blamed in the past as well, and have been also pointed fingers at with regards to the involvement in Arshad Sharif's murder, and then, of course, the kind of narrative that has been put forward by the PTI chairman. And this perhaps was the reason that was cited by the DGISPR for making his public appearance, that this is not something that it can be tolerated, that the institutions are blamed. They also talked about how words such as neutral, something which was going to be a positive move for the democratic progress of the country, have been made into an abuse, and because of this, the kind of actions that were asked from the armed institutions were not happening. This is why all of this involvement is now being pointed towards. They also talked about how backdoor channels were utilized by the former Premier, and that in broad daylight he was calling people, especially the Chief of Army Staff, and of course pointing fingers toward his role and being a traitor, when in fact the kind of meetings that were happening in the backdoor were asked by the former Premier. In response to all of this, there was also, of course, the press conference by the PTI leadership as well, who refuted these claims and said that any meetings that were held by backdoor channels were also no secret, and they are part of all the public records, and that in fact every demand that was spoken about was constitutional. There was nothing extra constitutional that was talked about in the backdoor meetings as well. And of course, when we talk about the entire involvement and the way the armed institutions have been brought into the narrative, they talked about how the PTI chairman has the right to criticize, and it's not that they can be okay with every decision that the army takes. We're going to be taking a look at all of this and what it means in terms of the security of the country, in terms of what's going to now happen in light of the call for Long March, which is going to be starting tomorrow in Lahore, and how the political situation is going to evolve with regards to the inquiry as well into Arshad Sharif's murder. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farooq Patafi and Raja Faisal, and we've been joined online by Mr. Anas Malik, who's a journalist, and Brigadier retired Mr. Rashid Wali Janjua, Director Research IPRI, and Mr. Javed Chadoon, who's a political analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the show today. Let me start with you, Brigadier Janjua. Of course, this is a historic press conference that was held today by DGIS and DGISPR. And perhaps in terms of what has been happening since the start of this year, it was important for this to be done so in terms of course, clearing the ground of numerous allegations and finger pointing that has been done for quite some time. We also saw earlier this year that a large political divide within the country, within the armed institutions, was also attempted by the PTI leadership. And of course, with regards to what has happened now in the aftermath of Arshad Sharif's murder, there is, of course, a lot of that happening as well. And perhaps this clearance was necessary. But in terms of what all has been said and the kind of issues that have been pointed out, especially when we take a look at how the cipher was played with, something that is also part of the audio leaks, how the armed institutions took a decision to remain out of politics, and even that was criticized or made into a negative light. And then, of course, with Arshad Sharif's murder, how the agencies were perhaps implied as being involved into this. When we take a look at all of this, how significant and important was this press conference? And do you think that it clarifies a lot of the things for the people in order for them to understand what really is happening?
Thank you, Sana. Yeah, I would like to start this discourse by condoling with the family of Mr. Arshad Sharif. Indeed, a very, very poignant moment for entire family. Absolutely. May his soul rest in peace. Well, it was an unprecedented press conference and a very important one. The mere fact that DGISI, for the first time in Pakistan's history, had to come on national TV to vocalize his concerns is indicative of the very important need for this discourse at this point of time, because there was a flood of mendacity and calumny, a deluge of fake news, a narrative being peddled just to score political brownie points, which was diametrically opposed to the national interest. And I think had the institutions remained quiet, this would have continued unabated. And I think it is a very, very important occasion, and at the same time an important occasion, but a moment of concern for each one of us. So we must introspect as to why this polarized discourse has gone to a state where DGISI had to come and explicate his concerns. But the way he spoke, the candor with which he laid bare the facts, I think should lay to rest for all times to come the false narrative and the conspiracy theories, which were carefully constructed in the shape of a narrative in order to keep the political following in line. And those were plain facts that
right. Brigadier Saab, let me actually take you back to what you said earlier, that it is going to end speculation. After this, we saw the presser from the PTI leadership, and also if you have seen a social media bubble that they actually, curate, similar kind of stuff is going around. Do you think that it is literally going to end all this speculation?
You see, it's not going to end right away, but it will, diminish its virulence to a quite a degree. We must be familiar of the bigger malaise. The bigger malaise is this no holds barred sans morality, the political polarization, which Henry Kissinger in his book Leadership Lives has indicated. This onset of social media, this has three elements: immediacy, intensity, and polarity. The polarity is the most dangerous. It divides. And there are demagogues, there are politicians, and the populists who have the characteristic of, you know, uh, capitalizing on the divisions and cleavages in the society. And it is, research has proven, the European Journal of Political Research 2019 points out in a study that it is the societal cleavages and differences and hatreds that are exploited by the populace, and it is the megalomania and the lust for power that blinds you to all other consideration for a contrarian viewpoint, tolerance of somebody's views, the art of civil dialogue, and above all, the considerations for national security. In the past couple of months, what we saw was momentum being built, riding a crest of mendacity, peddled on social media by these activists who are half educated. Nobody knows whether they are intermediate qualified or not. And
Right,
the way
absolutely. And that, of course, has had a huge impact. But the concern, of course, is whether or not that matters and what sort of priorities exist within the political leadership, and if they're willing to pay these costs in terms of what impact it has on the nation for their own political gains. Javed Jadun Saab, considering, of course, that so many other things have also happened that have impacted PTI in the past, and now, of course, this presser has directly cleared a lot of things that have been claimed earlier by the PTI leadership. However, we still saw that perhaps a lot of what has been discussed is lost on the PTI and perhaps their followers as well. And so when we look at the kind of political impact or the change or the clarifications that are needed in terms of this polarization to end, do you think that today's presser has contributed towards that? And if not, how do we proceed, considering now that so much is being discussed by the military leadership as well and by political leadership as well, and it seems this two fronts have opened up now.
And Javed Saab, if you allow me,
yes.
what we've
Yes.
seen is obviously today we got this presser, and then later on, of course, there was a rebuttal from the PTI side. Do you see in coming future more of these kind of pressers coming out to bring forth the truth, and then obviously there would be more rebuttals?
Thank you very much. I think let me answer what Sana just asked. I think it is extremely important to understand what prompted DGISI, as was pointed out earlier, that it is unprecedented in the history of Pakistan that the chief or head of the premier intelligence agency comes on stage with DGISPR and addresses the media. I think there's a tremendous pressure on the institution right now because of the avalanche of criticism, avalanche of conspiracy theories being churned out on daily basis. Social media, of course, has become a very important force in negative way and the positive way as well. That prompted DGISI to come out in the open and defend the institution, which was being finger pointed by many people, including some of the media personalities, maybe not directly, but indirectly. And everybody does understand in the wake of the assassination or murder of very eminent, very prominent anchor person and journalist Ashad Sharif in Kenya. So many questions were raised: how he went to Kenya, why he stayed over there. It's such a dangerous country, not with sterling kind of a law and order situation over there. He ultimately decided to go to Kenya, and that is the important question which has to be answered by the investigators. But I think social media was very prompt to point fingers towards the establishment, and I think that really made the pressure to the boiling point, and he came out and defended the institution, very rightly so. Because if you keep on attacking the institution without any proof and without any, with unsubstantiated allegations, then I think the pressure is on the institution, which is responsible for Pakistan's internal and external security and defense. I believe it is kind of a chaotic situation, as you pointed out, that then there was another presser from the PTI leaders, not one, two, three, but I think most probably five political leaders from the PTI were out there giving their own point of view. And they were responding to whatever was said during the DGISPR's and DGISI's press conference. The content, they were literally rebutting it with not so many words. Though with a lot of caution, but they rebutted the content the two generals sitting out there. And thirdly, and most importantly, Imran Khan is coming to the capital. It will depend whether the presser and many other things which are happening around right now are going to dent the potency of the long marchers which intend to come to Islamabad and lay siege to the federal capital, because this is what they're going to do. They're not going to enter into Islamabad. They have decided that, and they have it has been said, decided, and announced by the chairman, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. They will not be entering the red zone, but staying outside the periphery of the
Yeah.
federal capital. But
Right.
what is going
Javed
to happen
allow me
when you
also.
lay siege to the federal capital?
Right.
Of course, you are going to
We
paralyze the
also
present
actually
government
have to
and
quickly go to Anas as well, who's been waiting for a while. But
Yeah, please go.
perhaps we can also direct this question again to Javed Saab. Anas, thank you very much for joining us in the debate. Considering, of course, the presser and then the rebuttal that has happened that we're talking about, now we see that this is perhaps something that is being done in terms of the political leadership and the institutions sort of entering into a face-off that unfortunately has been also part of the kind of narrative that the PTI chairman has talked about. Moving forward, of course, when we see that this Hakiki Azadi March is is on the horizon, and then considering how it's going to impact the political involvement, what do you see in the coming days in terms of what has happened in the aftermath of Ashad Sharif's murder? And then also today's presser, that is going to be the relationship between the political leadership and the armed institutions, especially with the PTI, considering, of course, that this rhetoric is part of their rallies and is part of whatever they talk about in front of the public, and presumably will also be part of the Hakiki Azadi March.
Thank you so much, Sana, for having me on the show. Last question first. I think this pressure, while it is setting the tone going forward on the part of the military, that they're apolitical, as much as they would want to say that they're apolitical, unfortunately, like it or not, this pressure essentially became about Imran Khan in one way or the other. So it could be a shot in the arm for the Imran Khan-led party, where they would want to portray that, look, we're so big that even the military had to come out and had to respond and had to talk about it in open. But having said that, as much as the military has distanced itself, there's one thing that is consensus with regard to the murder of Ashad Sharif, is that even institutions in Pakistan, including the military, is not convinced with what the Kenyan police has referred to by saying it was a case of mistaken identity, or that they had fired upon back, and so on and so forth, which we've seen the top secret details of the statements that they have been coming in the past few days from the Kenyan police. Having said that, this will definitely be a shot in the arm, but it's a race for narratives as well. Imran Khan, the PTI chairperson, former Prime Minister as well, he was just at another TV interview. We saw a barrage of press conferences coming in from the government side, and then the response or rebuttal coming in from the PTI leadership. It said that they would not want to directly respond to the military leadership because they don't want to be in confrontation, but essentially their answers were in response to that of the military leadership. So the PTI would want to give a semblance, or rather build this narrative that they're pretty much on the right track. But then again, it will be a battle of nerves going forward. To the first part of your question, it's going to be really interesting in the coming days. In less than some hours from now, Imran Khan is going to proceed. The PTI is going to proceed from Lahore, and then in a week from now, he gets to Islamabad. Now, whether or not he gets to Islamabad, that's a very big question. What are his objectives? What does he want to achieve? That's still unclear. He's calling for an election, or he's demanding an election. So what if an assurance is given by powers that be, or even the political government that, in X number of months, let's say in 11 months from now, we'll be calling an election, or if you want to sit down with us, that is something that was hinted by Shah Mahmood Qureshi as well, that in case if the government wants, then they're willing to sit down with the government and do some negotiations with regards to the election. So it's going to be very interesting, because as we speak, Imran Khan's plan going forward is not defined. It's all up in the air. But one thing that is very, very certain, if I club today's press conference, both of the military side and then the barrage of press conferences that was done by the government side as well, by the incumbent government rather, that is one thing that is very clear, is that they will be allowed to march, they will be allowed to come into Islamabad, as long as, and that is the caveat, as long as the march or this protest remains peaceful. Sana?
Exactly. Anas, if we obviously look at the narratives coming out from the PTI side, of course, they are entirely based on a conspiracy related to a cipher. And if we talk about cipher, government, the sitting government has obviously busted it in past. And if we talk about the institutions as well, they are calling it, that there was no conspiracy. And of course, PTI is wrongly using that cipher. So isn't it the time that this cipher must be deciphered so that people at large can understand it better?
I think there are greater ramifications in case if the entire document is deciphered, as you said, or declassified. For one very reason, it hampers the relationship not just with one particular country, but going forward with other Pakistani diplomats posted in foreign capitals. If they send something what we call a telegram or a cipher, then he would want to take meetings with them, knowing that one day their names can be out. And we're talking about current generation. So let's say in about 10 to 20 years from now, if it's declassified, if it's decoded, like it is done in the US or other European countries, probably then it would not be having much of an impact. But yes, the content, essential, the gist of it needs to be out in public. That is something
Right.
that has to be created.
Right. Considering, of course, today's press conference, Farooq, this is historic, as was said earlier as well by Janjua Sahab as well. And of course, the fact that the DJISI made the appearance for the first time, the gravity is there. But in terms of what was said regarding the institution's decision to step away from political matters, and that this was something that the Chief of Army Staff also held his ground on, even though the lucrative offer, as said by DJISI, was made in terms of his extension, is an important one, since of course this is what we're trying to achieve democratically within the country for quite some time, and perhaps what is needed for our progress. But at the end of the day, the kind of statements coming in from PTI somehow question this particular neutrality itself. And then when we take a look at how things have evolved and how today's presser was carried out, there is also shock that has been shared by the PTI leadership as well in terms of how this press conference perhaps should have come in from the political leaders in the government. But if we take a look at how complicated the situation is, and perhaps how blurry the lines are, how can we actually move towards this particular decision of the armed institutions to actually step away from political matters, since they're of course being dragged into it again and again? And at the end of the day, does this press conference or such press conferences serve the purpose of making it clear that they are not into the political matters of the country and are in fact apolitical?
Right, Sana, and that is a very good question. Will you allow me also to comment on a question that Faisal just asked about deciphering the cipher? I think that most of our friends, and I can't believe that I'm, after months of this whole thing, we are still actually dwelling upon the issue. One has to actually look at how this ciphers actually work. Usually they carry, the methods and means of how an embassy communicates with the country, its home. And that is not all. There is a huge procedure. When the message is received, then it is deciphered for inner communication. And even then, a summary is written, which is notified and signed and stamped by the authorities concerned. And it is not the ambassador or the High Commissioner who receives it, right? And this is how it then goes to whosoever is thought should receive. If you want to actually open all the secrets, I'm game to that as well. We can open up, ISI headquarters as a museum and everything, like that. But with due respect, otherwise, if you want to keep secrets, this is how it is going to work. Now, talking about today's, presser, I think it was unprecedented, but it was not something that was really shocking. Why? Because the state of affairs around the world of governance is changing. If head of CIA can come on screen, if he can actually go even to the Congress, all over the world, spy masters actually appear in front of camera. So it is not a big deal. I think it was important to set the record straight, and that has been done. There are many things which were important that were discussed today and that were actually news to all of us. For example, when you talk about the question of indefinite extension, the offer of indefinite extension offered to the army chief by Imran Khan Sahab when he was ruling was news to me. It is something that one cannot even fathom what exactly that becomes. Then the question of TTP threat letter, that was amazing and astounding, because just remember who we are talking about. We are talking about a slain journalist who was so brave, mashallah, that he would actually walk into active war zones and without any fear for his bodily harm. That person would actually leave the country that easily. That doesn't actually compute in my mind. So there had to be some kind of pressing demand that was created. And astoundingly, our DGISPR and DGIA are telling us that they didn't know that there was such a communique or there was such a threat that was put out by the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government. That is very important, because we don't know whether it was a real threat or whether it was a made-up threat. And then, of course, the question of his visa, his departure from Dubai as well, I think that was very important. In the end, I think that yesterday when Wadda Saab actually spoke, he actually put out these warnings that there is going to be bloodshed and all that. Today, I found the DGI's response to this question very reassuring when he said that we will, the government and the authorities, even military authorities, will be able to secure that, right? That means that threat is out of the window now. And that is very reassuring, because God forbid if tomorrow we were to see some kind of bloodshed on the streets, that could have created a lot of panic and a lot of trouble in this country.
Exactly.
So I think that all these things were heartening, and I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that DGISI appeared in front of cameras, because in the coming days, I think eventually, because the entire world's governance structure is getting flatter and flatter, I think more of these people will start appearing, and that's okay.
All right.
Sana, if you can allow me to
yes,
go towards Brigadier Janjua.
Yes, let me just go to Brigadier Janjua as well, and you can add to that. Janjua Saab, considering what has been said by the PTI leadership, it's also important in terms of the kind of questions that have been raised, especially when we talk about what statements have been given by DGISI regarding the fact that, according to him, there were no threats to Arshad Sharif within Pakistan. But this, of course, has been challenged by the PTI leadership, and the claims have been made that whatever is being said is not truthful, and that, in fact, there were threats that existed. And that is, of course, a huge question mark to put on the intelligence agency of the country. And when we take a look at all of this and the kind of impact it has on the role that is being played by intelligence agency and the importance that they hold within the country, how are we going to be able to counter this, and what sort of accountability exists in terms of political leadership questioning statements coming in from the top brass of the intelligence agency?
And Brigadier Janjua, if we talk about a narrative which was being highlighted by PTI, which said that somebody forced Arshad Sharif to leave Dubai, and of course, obviously our institutions, they have said that nobody forced Arshad Sharif to leave Dubai. Do you think that this can also affect bilateral relations between UAE and Pakistan as well, and this kind of narrative is quite dangerous for Pakistan's diplomatic missions as well, sir?
Which kind of, sorry, just clarify your question very quickly.
My question
Whose narrative? PTI has a government of Pakistan. Okay, thank you. Sir, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I come back to my basic question, and that is, should we allow this no holds barred political discourse on social media on the steroids, which is irresponsible, which is not allowing any constraints to be obtruded upon its moral confines? I think time has come to put some kind of a regulatory code on all this. Unless we do so, we will be completely swept away by this tide of calumny. Second, I think...
But Janjua Saab, how are we going to achieve that? You say, should we allow this? And understand that you talked about some sort of regulation, but it is such a complicated matter.
Okay, let me complete. So I was coming to that. So first important step has been taken. The any disinformation campaign or any disinformation, ploy, it succeeds only if there are no facts available, and if there is a facts deficit, if there is wrong narratives being peddled from everywhere, then it's very difficult. For the first time in Pakistan's history, facts have been clearly laid bare in front of the whole nation by someone that the entire nation trusts. Believe you me, despite all this polarization, there is a there's a large segment of our population which still venerates army, and I think this message and these facts will resonate very well. So these facts will are the first steps to give people some peg to hang on to develop a counter narrative to these conspiracy theories. So these conspiracy theories, these lies, which are being carefully crafted in the shape of a media campaign and then given complete, virulent velocity on social media through these modern social media tools, can only be countered if there is a proper counter narrative based on facts, and people actually sift facts from fiction based on credible institution that feeds them that. This first step has been taken. The second step is civil society, academia, media. They must step in and try and correct the moral compass also, because the art of civil discourse is going away. Our moral values are in danger. This was not the kind of culture that has been promoted because of our populist ideologues' lust for power. Uh, long march, this entire narrative that has been crafted. So people should understand that the actual long march was 9,000 kilometers long march by the Red Army. They lost 50,000 people and they marched over arduous terrain, breaking 4 barricades in one encirclement. What is this? This is just a power lust march from Lahore to Islamabad. And the contradictions inherent in these narratives need to be pointed out. For instance, why do you meet in the darkness of the night and gain political favors once you stridently negate all those things and accuse people of treason in daylight? So it's a very big paradox in the narrative. So I think state should do a better job of stat communications, and I think the ballast has been given by this statement of DGISI, and this should act as a critical mass, which should snowball into counter conspiracy narrative by the state, academia, and the civil society that
Right.
wants the country to, regain sanity.
Absolutely, and that is important. Javed Sab, considering, of course, that a lot also depends on what truth is going to come out in terms of the Judicial Commission and the inquiry into Arshad Sharif's murder. There's a lot of talk with regards to laying out facts, and these are perhaps the most important facts that everybody seems to be looking for at the moment. But considering the way that we have seen previous judicial commissions also being formed on different matters and the kind of results that we have seen, do put a question mark in terms of what sort of issues are going to be taken a look at, how investigative or how truthful the inquiry is going to be, and how comprehensive will it be in terms of answering all of the questions. This, of course, is something that the nation also wants to understand when it takes a look at this Judicial Commission. How hopeful are you, particularly when we talk about this Judicial Commission, and then how can we ensure that whatever facts that come out from Arshad Sharif's murders inquiry is not something that then again is politicized and questioned and becomes part of another conspiracy?
Sana, let me please allow me to make few comments what Brigadier Janjua
Yes.
just said. I think whenever there's a problem in whenever there is any government in power and there's an issue as far as social media is concerned, we always start talking about curbs and clamp down. I think we don't understand where we are operating right now. It's a globalized village. The world has shrunk to a global village. And we talk about regulating the social media. We talk about clamp down on the social media. We talk about certain measures, draconian measures to put gums on the social media. But the solution, the way forward is why government failed to create a narrative, anti-narrative against the social media narratives against the establishment. Why they were forced to come out in the open and defend the institution. It was the responsibility of the defense minister. It was the responsibility of the prime minister of the country to defend the institutions rather than the DG ISI coming out and defending the institution. He said that he had to defend the institution because institution was under attack. Now, the problem with our armchair intellectual is this, that they always see media as a problem. Media is not a problem. Problem is basically the political leadership of the country. While the current dispensation, when they were in the opposition, they were attacking the institution with the same
But
venom, with the same poison. Now, same is
Jadun
being
Sahab,
done by
I get what you're
Pakistan
saying.
Tehreek-e-Insaf.
Jadun Sahab, allow me to actually just ask a counter question.
Sure.
I understand
Sure.
that your point is very legitimate. I totally agree when it comes to regulating social media. The bunch of algorithms are so advanced that we won't be able to regulate it even if we want to. And while we actually develop expertise to regulate that, the algorithm changes. So that will be, a fishing expedition that will never stop. But regarding what you were saying about the government, is it not true that PTI has its superpower that there is this very dedicated, group of people who are aligned with PTI and they keep on peddling or pushing their narrative. And these 13 parties that are ruling the country at this moment, they don't have any similar kind of group that could have actually supported that narrative. Maybe Prime Minister did not need to answer most of the social media narratives that were created, but there should have been some counterpoint that could have come from social media again.
Absolutely, Farooq, you are absolutely right that I think responsibility lies with the people, with the managers of the social media, with the people who are managing the ministries and managing the social media and the electronic and the regulated media as well. Narratives are always important, Farooq. We both know that counter narratives are always weak. Once the narrative is created, it is very hard to counter it. Instead, I think we need to create the narratives, not the counter narratives. But the problem with every government is this, they always go into slumber, they always suffer from the inertia. And when the problem becomes gigantic and uncontrollable, they come out and they fail to counter those very dangerous narratives. In Pakistan's context, Farooq, we do know that as far as the support base of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is concerned, it is the middle class which is supporting and the youth, the educated youth, which is very tech savvy and they know all the tools, how to use them with a very effective manner, effective way. So I think the problem lies with a strategy. We always lack a strategy to counter, whether it is a propaganda being perpetrated in against Pakistan's nuclear capability, against Pakistan's foreign policy incentives or initiatives, or any single individual or political party launching very unsubstantiated allegations against the national institutions without proof, without having any concrete evidence. They launch themselves and they put the institutions under pressure. And then I think that becomes a debating point. Now,
Right, absolutely. And Javed Saab, regarding the Judicial Commission, please.
Judicial Commission, I think, Sana, it was a right move on part of the ISI that they dropped their experts from the team because they didn't want it to be a suspect report. They didn't want the people to reject the report. So I think the two agencies, the Intelligence Bureau and the FIA, they are experts over there. But the difficulties they are going to face is in Kenya because the Kenyan authorities, it all depends how much kind of cooperation they extend to Pakistani team over there. But I believe one of the representatives of the media organizations should have been in that particular team so that they would have been there on site and they would have looked into it and they would have seen the kind of investigations we launch over there. And I think very rightly, let me say, Sana, very rightly pointed out by DG ISI or DG ISPR that we need to find the answers into the murder of the the very eminent anchor person. Otherwise, we have a very dangerous situation.
Absolutely.
At hand. This
And
is
I
what
have
he
another
meant.
question about
Anas.
the Judicial Commission, but
Yeah.
I'll come to that later. Yes,
Yeah,
Faisal.
Anas, if we talk about the media groups, obviously there was another, in the presser there was another important thing, and that was related to the role of ARY News, obviously one of the privately owned media group, and it is said that the spin doctors is the word that has been used for them, and obviously they are seeking the arrival of CEO Salman Iqbal in regarding the probing of whatever happened in narrative building throughout since March this year. Do you agree with it, number one? And number two, being a journalist, how do you see the role of all of these media groups? Obviously, almost all of the privately owned media groups, they have their own side and they have taken the political side. How do you see this kind of political role they're playing?
Well, first question, Faisal, I absolutely agree to what the DGISPR has said, that ARY was involved in spin doctoring. There is absolutely no doubt on that, how out of the way they went to build on this narrative, or to harp on this narrative with regards to the conspiracy, despite of the fact that it was shot down not once but twice by as high as the country's National Security Committee. So there is no doubt in that. They misquoted the ambassador, Asad Naveed. He was misquoted as well. So things like that, they actually go on to prove that it was not just deliberately misleading on their part, but to the point that it was trying to maneuver the narrative as well in particular favor of a particular political party. Having said that, the second part of the question, I think media all over the world is polarized. It takes sides, but it's really unfortunate on the part in Pakistan that it's so blatant that there is no impartial party. And I think as journalists, we truly have to remain impartial. We get played in the hands of the owners, we get played at the hands of these business tycoons that unfortunately do not understand the core essence of journalism, that is speaking truth to power, irrespective of whosoever it is. And I think that is deplorable, and that is where the regulatory authority needs to come in. It needs to ensure that it has to regulate, then the regulation has to be impartial, irrespective of whosoever is in power.
Right. Anas, let me ask you another very important thing. Shortly after this presser, there was another press conference by, Rana Sanaullah, the Interior Minister, who claimed that the two persons in Kenya who were involved in the story were actually employed by ARY. I didn't hear something similar coming from the ISPR or ISI, but we saw this claim. If tomorrow this turns out that the whole arrangement of placing Arshad in Dubai and also in Kenya was ARY's, will it further complicate the case against ARY?
Of course it will, Farooq Sahib. It will further complicate the case against ARY, and rather it would then again go on to raise questions. If you remember, earlier this year, their license was revoked by the Ministry of Interior. So it will further go on to implicate the owners as into possible conspiracy to plot an assassination. And God forbid, I really hope that is not the case, because it is the media owners, media workers, journalists who are down in the ground, out in the field, that have to suffer with decisions like these. I'm sure if Rana Sanaullah has said this, as it has been reported, then he should be having, and he must be having, something to back his claim. But having worked as the organization, knowing the infrastructure, I highly doubt, on a very personal note, that somebody like, as it's been said, as Mr. Khurram or Mr. Waqar, knowing that they have an open business that is listed in Kenya in the directory, that they would be employed on the part of ARY. But yes, the connection should be probed. Who sent Arshad Sharif? Why was he sent here? Why was he held up, particularly in a farmhouse off the location? Who knew about his location? So on and so forth. There are plenty of questions.
Absolutely.
By them.
Absolutely. And Anas, these are of course questions that must be answered. But I'll take a quick question from Janjua Saab, considering what was said earlier with regards to the Judicial Commission. I just want your comment on the fact that when we talk about how it has been said that for the benefit of the people, for them to have this faith that the investigation has been carried out truthfully and objectively, it was important for nobody from the intelligence agencies to be a part of it. Isn't that a matter of concern that perhaps the inclusion of somebody from the intelligence agency is actually going to be a question mark, and so it's supposedly a good thing that they're not a part of it?
I think we should make a very clean breast of it, the whole issue. And if for transparency's sake, exclusion of an agency's persons from that JIT creates that kind of transparency, I think then be it. But the bigger thing is that, this whole battle has to be fought on 4 planes. Facts have been established. Dissemination of these facts should be consistent and consistent with the truth, and it should be regular so that there is no truth deficit that I pointed out. Second, the narrative must be consistently built against all those lies that are being peddled. Regulations, I don't know, people are skeptical. I'm not talking of that ham-handed regulation. There are technological tools with which things can be identified, and the libel laws should be strengthened so that there is a fair measure of check on this unabated, calumny. So that's the intent, and unless our libel
absolutely. And thank you very much, Brigadier Janjua, for joining us, Javed Jatun Saab, and of course Anas Malik for joining us, and of course Farooq and Faisal for being a part of the debate. That's all that we have time for. We'll see you tomorrow.